Is it just me, or is the quality of our leaders on the decline? Back just 50 years ago or 40 years ago, we used to have Thatcher, Reagan, Pope John Paul II, and a generation or two before them, Winston Churchill, FDR, and Harry Truman, and Charles de Gaulle. Churchill, Roosevelt, and de Gaulle won the Second World War. Reagan and Thatcher tore down the Soviet Union. And both subsets of leaders ushered in prosperous times, whether through the post-war economic boom or the post-Cold War unipolar moment. And it's not just our side that has the downgrade. The evil leaders of the 20th century, like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Mao Zedong, murdered hundreds of millions of people when you combine all their death tolls together. But even their accomplishments, quote unquote, are still more significant, brave, or wondrous than those in the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea axis today. Like, compare Mao Zedong, who won a civil war against Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists, versus Xi Jinping today, who some are saying he's reversing the Chinese economic miracle since Deng Xiaoping. And Joseph Stalin, in spite of his flaws in the initial stages of Operation Barbarossa, is able to transform the Soviet Union from a backwater after his disastrous famine and Ukrainian genocide in the 1930s to a major superpower by the end of the Second World War, while challenging the other superpower, the United States of America. Even Hitler staged a beer hall push, fought in World War I, conquered the whole of Europe before killing himself with a gunshot in his bunker. Compared with Putin today, and there's a striking difference. While Putin did reverse the decline under the Yeltsin years, I think the growth in Russia in the 2000s and early 2010s were in spite of him, as countries like Poland and the Baltics grew even faster than even Russia. And those nations do not have the authoritarian baggage that currently Russia has. And in Putin's war against Ukraine, he only seized like 1/5 of the country, when originally he wanted to seize the whole thing, destroy the NATO alliance, preventing it from creeping up to its borders, and liquidate the Ukrainian state. It seems that as of the time that this video is posted, he has achieved none of those gains, with Ukraine now firmly in the Western alliance, and despite it being barred from being a member of NATO, it is very likely, or even 100% of a probability, that Western troops that are not American will provide peacekeeping efforts, with the US as a backstop via air power, as Trump himself stated. And now to the big question: why are leaders now more impotent, less charismatic, more technocratic, or sleazier, or at least having the impression of such? In my view, this applies to most politicians, from Donald Trump to Keir Starmer to Putin to Merz in Germany to Macron and many, many more. With the exceptions of Ron DeSantis in Florida, given his feat of transforming Florida from a swing state to a deep red state, as he governed conservatively and made Florida the model of conservative right-wing governance with high economic growth, safe streets, pushback against wokeness, degenerate behaviors, decent measures like banning phones in schools for elementary and middle school students, and pushback against foreign adversaries, and Milei in Argentina with his free market experiment and moving away from the disastrous policies of Peronism, with his nation now spouting high GDP growth, a decline in inflation, rise of new construction in major cities, and the decline of rent controls leading to a boom in the housing market. You've seen the meme: weak times create strong men. Strong men create strong times. Strong times create decadent and weak men, and weak men create weak times. I think it's because our world has increased its living standards over the last 200 years. Think about it. In the early 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had just started. Millions of people were still bonded into slavery. Electricity was not yet invented as a means to power our world. Life was a lot tougher then, and due to this, it was expected for leaders to go beyond the fray. This is why you see Napoleon, the King of France, go into battle, compared to Macron criticizing Netanyahu behind the scenes, rather than flying in peacekeepers alongside himself to Gaza. Even at the turn of the 20th century, the world was more harsh. Despite the successes in science and technology, diseases were still rampant. The idea that bacteria and viruses causes sickness was only a relatively recent thing in the last 40 to 50 years. Child labor laws and women's rights were not up to 21st century standards, and there was still a large social divide. Fewer people had the luxuries of 21st century life, which is why leaders then still had to prove themselves above all of the ordinary citizenry. While it is true that in the 1950s to 1980s, mass consumerism became mainstream alongside globalization and the ease of access to transportation, whether by car across motorways or by plane across continents. The Cold War was in full swing. The world has only recently witnessed the horrors of the Second World War, with many Holocaust survivors still amongst their generation. People were also terrified of having another world war, similar or even greater to the horrors of the First and Second World War, due to nuclear weapons. The desire not to be conquered by another country, like the Soviet Union, incentivized leaders to take things way more seriously than they do today. While it is true that the West today faces a multitude of threats, both at home and abroad, post-Cold War globalization and the rise of mass consumerism allows our leaders and even the political culture writ large to be more feeble and unserious. The rise of social media also prioritizes clicks and likes rather than actual governance. This is why you see Donald Trump win against someone like Ron DeSantis, even if Ron DeSantis actually accomplished way more than Donald Trump actually has. And this is why you also see politicians like Mamdani in New York City gaining traction via TikTok, even though his ideas are unrealistic to say the least, and at worst, catastrophic failures that will wreck New York at least for a generation. I mean, how did government owned supermarkets work in the Soviet Union? Or even today in Kansas City, that experiment catastrophically failed. Yet, idiots like him wants to try it all again. And in the non-democratic world, or Eastern Bloc, observe the situation in the 1940s. Germany occupied a lot of Western Russia, and with 22 million sacrificed in the Great Patriotic War, the Soviet Union was able to defeat the Nazis. China went from battling the Japanese to having a civil war where the communists won. In both of those situations, one small mistake or leadership failure could cost your country victory. Living standards, especially for China, were much lower then than now. After Mao died, China was still at Indian levels poverty, if not worse. However, today, China is a rival superpower, second only to the United States. And while it does not have the same standard of living as a lot of the Western countries, it is certainly wealthier than a lot of the Third World, and much wealthier than India. Because of the level of prosperity, bad decisions relating to the economy will have less impact now than it did during the opening and reform up era, or even during Mao. or during the Second World War years, where bad food harvest seasons could cause troop starvation, thus leading to the enemy's victory, or mass rebellions among the peasant classes, leading them to switch sides. I think a lot of people today have no idea how good we have it in living standards, both in the West and in the East when compared to our ancestors. In the end, I think good leadership is still possible. However, only DeSantis, at least in the civilized world, has gotten to a position where policy trumps personality. In Argentina, though, where they faced 100 years of decline and stagnation under socialism and Peronism, it took a once in a century figure like Milei to turn things around. And yes, it is true he does have charisma, and rose on TikTok as well. However, even his greatest critics in the Western developed world are now acknowledging that even if he's not perfect, he's certainly a massive improvement over the Peronist status quo. Let's just hope that the West faces a Florida experience where there's no mass poverty or stagnation or crisis to turn things around, and that democratically, in the 21st century mass consumerist world, it is still possible to elect decent politicians, rather than going down the Argentina route, where things have to get terribly, horribly worse before they get better. Wait, stop, do not leave this video yet. If you have the time, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And by the way, also check out my Substack, link in description. A lot of good stuff is on there, like articles about convincing the left to be more anti-immigration, and lots of photos from America to arcades. Thanks very much for watching, and hope you have a great day.